A 19-year-old boy from Ohio steps off a plane into 100-degree heat. The air smells like nothing he has ever encountered, jet fuel, jungle, and something else he cannot name. He has been in the United States Army for 8 months. He has never fired a weapon at a living person. He has no idea where he is going or what will happen when he gets there. He knows only what his government has told him, that he is here to stop the spread of communism, that this is necessary, that this is right. 3 years later, if he survives, he will come home to an airport where strangers spit on his uniform, and the government that sent him here will pretend, for decades, that none of this ever happened the way it did. Act 1. How America walked into Vietnam. Vietnam was not a decision. It was a drift, a slow accumulation of choices, each one seemingly reasonable in isolation, that together produced a catastrophe. American involvement in Vietnam began not with soldiers, but with money. After World War II, France, a colonial power that had controlled Vietnam for nearly a century, was fighting a war against Vietnamese independence fighters led by Ho Chi Minh. The United States, committed to containing communism wherever it appeared, began funding the French war effort in 1950. When France was decisively defeated at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954 and withdrew from Vietnam, America stepped into the vacuum. The country was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel. Communist North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, and South Vietnam under a series of American-backed governments that were, almost without exception, corrupt, unpopular, and unable to maintain legitimacy with their own people. American military advisors arrived, then more advisors, then combat troops, first hundreds, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands. By 1968, over 500,000 American soldiers were in Vietnam. No one had made a single decision to send 500,000 soldiers. It had happened step by step, administration by administration, each escalation justified by the previous one, each commitment making the next commitment harder to avoid. Act 2, the war that could not be won the way it was fought. Vietnam was unlike any war America had fought before. There were no clear front lines, no territory to capture and hold in the conventional sense. The enemy, the Viet Cong in the South and the North Vietnamese Army, used guerrilla tactics that American military doctrine was not designed to counter. They melted into the civilian population. They used tunnel networks. They fought at night. They avoided pitched battles when they could and struck when America was vulnerable. American strategy responded with overwhelming firepower, bombing campaigns of a scale that exceeded the total tonnage dropped in all of World War II. Napalm, Agent Orange, a chemical defoliant sprayed across millions of acres of Vietnamese jungle to destroy the tree cover the enemy used for concealment. Search and destroy missions into villages suspected of harboring Viet Cong fighters. A war measured not in territory gain but in body count. How many of the enemy had been killed? The strategy produced enormous casualties on all sides. It did not produce victory, and it produced something else. Images and stories that began arriving back in America and changing the way Americans understood what their government was doing in their name. Act 3, the home front breaks. In January 1968, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched the Tet Offensive, a massive, coordinated series of attacks on more than 100 South Vietnamese cities and towns, including assault in the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The offensive was eventually repelled. Militarily, it was, in some respects, a defeat for North Vietnam. But it was a catastrophic psychological defeat for the United States, because the American government had been telling its people for years that the war was being won, that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that the enemy was weakening. And then, on live television, Americans watched Viet Cong fighters inside the grounds of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The credibility of the government collapsed. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted journalist in America, a man so respected he was called the most trusted man in America, went to Vietnam after Tet and came back and told his television audience on air that the war appeared to be a stalemate that could not be won. When President Lyndon Johnson heard what Cronkite had said, he reportedly told an aide, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." 6 weeks later, Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. The anti-war movement, which had been growing since the mid-1960s, exploded. College campuses across America erupted in protest. At Kent State University in Ohio, in May 1970, National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters, killing 4 and wounding 9. The image of a young woman kneeling over the body of a dead student became one of the defining photographs of the era. America was not just divided about Vietnam. It was breaking. Act 4, the soldiers who came home. For the men who fought in Vietnam. Most of them draftees, most of them young, many of them from working class and minority backgrounds who lacked the connections or resources to obtain deferments. Coming home was its own kind of war. Vietnam veterans returned not to parades and celebrations, but to a country that had turned against the war they had fought. Some were met with hostility, called names, told they were war criminals, blamed personally for a war they had been ordered to fight. Many were simply ignored. The country wanted to move past Vietnam, and the men who had been there were a reminder of something America preferred not to think about. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, was not yet a recognized diagnosis. Veterans who struggled with the psychological aftermath of what they had seen and done were told to get over it. Many couldn't. Rates of substance abuse, homelessness, and suicide among Vietnam veterans were dramatically higher than in the general population. The Veterans Administration was overwhelmed and underfunded. The country that had sent these men to fight had no infrastructure prepared to help them come back. And then there was Agent Orange. The chemical defoliant that American forces had sprayed across Vietnam was dioxin-contaminated, a fact the government knew and suppressed. Veterans who had been exposed to Agent Orange began developing cancers, neurological disorders, and other serious illnesses at elevated rates. Their children were born with birth defects at higher rates than the general population. The government denied any connection for years, decades, while veterans died. Compensation came slowly, partially, and only after protracted legal battles that lasted into the 1990s. Closing sequence. The last American combat troops left Vietnam in 1973. Saigon fell to North Vietnamese forces on April 30th, 1975. The war that America had entered to prevent a communist Vietnam ended with a communist Vietnam. At the cost of approximately 58,000 American lives, an estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilian deaths, and a fracture in American society and American trust in government that has never fully healed. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., a long black granite wall, inscribed with the names of 58,281 Americans who died in the war, was dedicated in 1982. Its designer, Maya Lin, was a 21-year-old architecture student at Yale. Some veterans refused to visit it for years. Many wept the first time they saw it. Others came and pressed their hands against the names of men they had known, men who had stepped off planes into 100-degree heat and never come back. There is no lesson from Vietnam that America has fully learned. The country still debates what the war meant, whether it was necessary, who was responsible for its failure, and what was owed to those who fought it. What is beyond debate is this: 58,281 names on a wall. Each one was a person. Each one was somebody's 19-year-old. Fade to black. 58,281 Americans died in Vietnam. An estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilians died during the war. Over 3 million American soldiers served in Vietnam. The last American combat troops left in 1973. Saigon fell in 1975. Agent Orange-related health claims by veterans continue to be processed to this day. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial was designed by 21-year-old Maya Lin, a Yale architecture student, and